Okay, we are live. Wow, 2024 has been one heck of a year for me, and I just want to sort of give you a little history of the IRS Medic channel. I started this channel a long time ago, really just as a way to drive business for myself, and it worked incredibly well. But I got a little bit into the whole thing, and I was always looking for really good content that would be a little bit more than just sort of commercial intent, but trying to lift us all up out of this trap. And it was always a challenge. It was always a challenge to find topics to talk about. And now, 2024, we can't even keep on top of everything. There's so many changes going on. There's so many things I have in the hopper to get out. But it's just endless and it's relentless. And so it's a great thing. We don't have everything our way, but I think we have so many positive things and people waking up to really a lot of bad things. And we have some good news, some things that aren't so good, but some really, really good news. Joining me today is the great John Richardson. John has created another great presentation to go over what is exactly happened in 2024. So good morning to you, John. Let's get into it right away. I think people are pretty excited about this podcast. I know I am. I know I'm very excited about this when we really look at everything going on. So good morning to you, John. How are you doing?
All's good.
All right. It's exciting. It's a great, exciting year. So here it is. We go back to our favorite here. And I actually have this link up if anyone wants to get this book. This book, it really describes so much of everything that's going on with this world. And you really get a look at the United States of America through a different lens, what it really is. I think one of the things that confuses a lot of people is like they can't understand. How did we get from this tax haven we were allegedly during the founding of this country to this disaster we are now? And the answer is you've been lied to. You've been lied to. There's your answer. So let's get into sort of what's been going on in 2024. Here we go. Good morning, John. So let's go through this here.
So Anthony, thinking back over the year, what I've done is identified some themes, that and some important cases, and this is really from the perspective of individuals, right? And
right.
With a heavy emphasis on Americans abroad. So this is interesting. So I want to go through these with you, but I also want to make the point here that the way I see this is that, we have one case that gets us partway there, and then, like the baton is passed to the next litigant who extends it a little more, et cetera. So we see a lot of that, and, we can identify a lot of litigants, who really, should have statues erected to them, around the United States. Very important, but also, that's from sort of the legal perspective, things that have changed. But from a group perspective, an individual perspective, a lot of people have done some great advocacy work, and I want to do a shout out to them as well.
Absolutely. Oh my, yeah.
Through this at the end of the year, because as much as I dislike the Democrats, there was that book written by Hillary. I think it was "It Takes a Village."
Yeah.
And And there's definitely been progress, but I want to make the point that this progress is the result of an awful lot of efforts, right? From a lot of different people, a lot of different groups, a lot of different litigants, groups and people perhaps whose interests aren't particularly aligned, but have gradually, I think, moved, the country, individuals, towards a more just tax system. But anyway. So let's start off with, we did all kinds of podcasts on Moore. This was, of course, the case where, the transition tax issue where, the United States wanted individuals to pay tax on money they never received. But it got worse because it was retroactive 30 years. I mean, this is truly something that could be invented only by the United States, right? So this goes to the Supreme Court, with Moore. And when it came down, the result was 7-2 against Moore. And people were saying, oh, my God, the Moores lost, et cetera. But, if you read the decision carefully, what it really says is assuming there's a realization of income, assuming, not deciding whether it's necessary, but assuming that income can be attributed to the shareholders. So the court bypassed really the decision of whether realization was required. However, 4 of the 9 judges, Gorsuch, Thomas, Barrett, and Alito, seemed to say that realization was required, as a matter of constitutional law. Only Justice Jackson said no, leaving me with the impression that the Moores actually won. Because they seem to have established the beginning of a precedent for the realization of income as a constitutional requirement. Then we come to Roger Ver.
Well, I just want, and I want to just insert my own little opinion on Moore. Moore really seemed to me, I'm not as optimistic about it because, how I see, the courts do things is they take things out of context. And so I think either way, I would say either way. I would say either side, those who want to tax fake income, they had something to take away in Moore, and those who are against it also take something to take away from. What Moore will eventually mean, I don't know, but I am not looking at it myself as a huge victory. I think it can be. I think you're right, John, and I want you to be right. I'm just worried about later interpretations.
Roger Ver is now, got the issue front center.
All right, yeah, right. So Roger, right,
and this podcast about his indictment, etc. And the issue, of course, was underpaying the exit tax, which was a fake income event.
Right.
And he's got, good lawyers, and they're trying to get the indictment dismissed on the basis that the exit tax is unconstitutional. Why? Because it's fake income. And you can be sure that they are going to be looking to the decisions of Gorsuch, Thomas, Barrett, and Alito, okay, to justify that. So this is really interesting stuff, okay?
Okay.
To keep track of the Ver thing as this goes along. But this is I think the first case that's interesting. So notice though that so much of this depends on what you look at, right? And I tend to read these cases and try to understand how they can be used as opposed to what the result is. The Moore decision has provided tools to use, okay, for the argument that the exit tax is unconstitutional. But anyway, moving on. There's lots more stuff going on.
All right, Roger Ver. Yeah, and Roger Ver is a really interesting case because, as I reviewed it, the thing that struck out to me is that Roger Ver should have known when he was renouncing his citizenship that Bitcoin was going to take off to the moon. Whereas if actually he sold his Bitcoin portfolio, he could have tanked the entire thing because it was exactly at the time of the Mt. Gox dissolving. That's right, Magic the Gathering online exchange, the only platform where you could trade Bitcoin, had a problem and Bitcoin crashed. And Roger Ver, I think, did a pretty good job in valuing what his Bitcoin was. But the government wants what it wants. So, hey, here we go. All right, moving on.
Well, right. No discussion of what happens in America could even, be suggested to be complete without talking about form crime. And, we have got tremendous advances in form crime. Okay, I can just imagine a bunch of law professor conference. Advances in form crime 2024.
Oh, they're getting excited. Yeah, I could imagine that. I could imagine them milling about. Let's get in, guys. Hey, we've got a bunch of form crimes.
Remember, Anthony, we did the podcast about the wedding ring.
Remember that? I thought you were joking a little bit.
Oh, no, I was not.
No, you weren't. No.
And I was proven to have been prescient because here we have a case, okay, where we have Ms. saying a Chinese national was assessed a penalty. So anyway, here she's a Chinese national. She's getting married in China, and and her Chinese relatives give her wedding gifts, to the tune of $218,000 US. Well, later in the year, now the first point I want to make is that at the moment she received the wedding gift, she was not a U.S. person under the code at all. Okay, she wasn't a green card holder, she wasn't a citizen, and she hadn't met the substantial presence test. But later in the year, she came to the United States, and by December, guess what? She'd spent enough time in the United States to have met the substantial presence test. So she went to her local tax advisor. That's, the beginning of a mistake, I think. Okay, but anyway, so she goes to the local tax and says, "Oh my God, you were a U.S. person from the first time in the year, and say January, when you entered the United States under this test. And you know what that means? That even though you weren't a U.S. person, really, when you received those dirty foreign gifts, later, by operation of law, you retroactively became a U.S. person. So not only do we have an outrageous penalty for failing to declare a dirty foreign gift, but it's based on retroactive attribution of U.S. tax residency."
Yeah.
Shades of more. Imagine Don't worry. Imagine she calls up Anthony and says, Anthony, I'm a Chinese national. I'm in China. I don't live in the United States. And I'm about to be given $218,000 of gifts from my future in-laws who are not yet nothing to do with the United States. But Anthony, I want to know, do I have any filing, any tax requirement? What would you say to her, Anthony?
I would say, well, this is an interesting question. Thanks so much for giving me a call. And I would say this, well, you're not a U.S. person, and you're not dealing with any U.S. persons. So the answer is obviously yes. You may, because you may change and you may become a U.S. person through a function of you being here. And the law will claw back in time to make you a U.S. person, even though you weren't at the time. And these are the things you need to be aware of. This is just what
So is this a message to everybody in the world who receives a gift that maybe they should report it to the IRS in case they eventually become a U.S. person? Is that your message?
Any gift over $100,000 from a foreign person, no matter what it is, even if hey, you don't know where it's going to happen, and I could really see, and actually, John, I'm just sort of thinking about this, the presentation that they're giving on the advances in foreign crime, and I think this is probably, they might put this one at the end. They might put this one at the end to say, hey, stick around. We're going to be talking about probably their favorite foreign crime, their biggest advance in foreign crime. I really think this might be it.
Well, here's the bottom line: retroactive tax and penalty residency, right? So, with Moore, we have the notion of the retroactive tax. With Zhang, we have the notion of the retroactive tax residency. Oh my God, we're going to retroactively deem you a U.S. person. So now you have to file this information return. How cool is that?
How cool is that?
In America.
Well, right. And again, it's wonderful because, hey, look, guys, this is all to fight terrorists. Thank God we have these forms because this is how terrorism is stopped. And money laundering, of course, too. Never mind the trillions the Pentagon loses, right? No. The problem, obviously, is you didn't report by the way, your foreign gifts aren't taxable. They're not taxable. But you got to report them. Then they become penaltyable. Is that a word? I think maybe that's the word we need. Penalizable. Penaltyable, right? That's the favorite word. That's probably in that presentation they're probably gonna listen to this and take snippets.
This is fantastic. This is a true advance in foreign crime. I love it. Only in America. Moving on.
All they're gonna need to do is take this presentation and remove the sarcasm, and I think they're gonna have it. There we go.
Where's the sarcasm? Now. This comes, I want to give a shout out to Phil Hodgen, who I
great Phil Hodgen. Yeah, Phil is really.
But you may recall, the Fari case, right, which ruled that, where they managed to get a decision that 5471 penalties were not assessable penalties. Well, that was appealed, and what happened was, they lost, and the decision was reversed. But here's the thing, okay. Question is, what geographical area do these decisions cover? Now, I don't want to get into the nuts, but I think that listeners might enjoy the following. Today, December 13th, the only people who are at risk of having Form 5471 penalties assessed are, look at this, residents of the District of Columbia and individuals living outside the United States. How cool is that? If you're running a local company, a company that's local to you outside the United States, you're eligible for a Form 5471 penalty when a U.S. resident who's running a foreign company is not. Truth, justice, and the American way, and a true advance in foreign crime. Anthony?
Well, this is a huge advance. You got to understand, Phil Hodgen is well respected, and incredibly well respected. He's been around for a bit of time. A bit longer than me. And he really knows his stuff. So the thing that I'm focusing on right there is that final bullet point right there where he says individuals living outside the United States. So residents of those are, if Phil Hodgen says, as of today, the only people who are at risk of having Form 5471 penalties assessed are residents of District of Columbia and individuals living outside the United States. Well, hey, that's good news if you live in the United States, and I certainly have some clients here. And if Phil Hodgen says it, it's gonna be hard to challenge that, I gotta say. So that's huge, and that's I didn't even know about this. Thank you so much for bringing it to
Well,
my attention. I didn't
Anthony,
even know about
the key
this.
point here, Anthony, is special penalty treatment for Americans abroad. I mean, this is a, this is just not with the intent, but the result. But this is very much consistent, right?
Yeah.
With creating a penalty for life living outside the United States. But I mean, there's more. Let's continue on.
Let's go. So, oh my
Let's
God, there's
up
more.
it.
There's more. The advancements in forecast.
I
And
mean,
this is,
Anthony,
and
tell me the truth. Isn't this the most exciting podcast you've ever done so far?
we're packed with information. We're
Let's
really
go
packed with
next.
information.
Next.
It is. There's so much going on here, and
We'll never find anything like today.
we'll never have it today. And this is, and I'm being a little sarcastic, a little bit. But really, and I want to be genuine right now. I think one of the things that we have to be thankful for is that, in my mind, the great legal work that I am seeing from attorneys all over the place, they're blowing me away. I don't know what happened, but I don't know. I think just attorneys have been, hey, what's going on here? And I've been seeing incredible work all through so many cases, and I think that's really something that we really, and not being sarcastic, we really should celebrate the
I
legal
think
work.
so, absolutely. But here we go. Now let's move on to tax treaties for a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Now, tax treaties, of course, are understood only by people who understand tax treaties. Wasn't that an intelligent thing I just said? I understood only.
It's very true, though. But it's very true.
But it is true.
It is true.
It's a small group of people. So let's look at some tax treaty victories. Well, we have Mr. Esti. Now, by the way, these litigants, these are the true heroes. They are the unsung heroes of life, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, because I mean, they're right on the line. So in Esti, and I think this is what we were in fact talking about before we went live today, okay, he was successful in arguing that a tax treaty tie-break provision can be used, okay, to protect non-resident aliens who are treaty non-residents from FBAR penalties and also from being a U.S. tax resident. But here's the point. This was largely a treaty-based argument, okay? So here we have a situation of the treaty preventing the IRS from assessing FBAR penalties. Pretty good. And next.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I would just say, and I that's the other thing I would say. Fantastic clients, people who are willing to put up their money, take the risk, and it's not fun to go through an ordeal, otherwise known as a trial, right? It's not a lot of fun. So really, a lot of bold people, a lot of great people who've been saying, yeah, you know what, I will litigate this, and that's wonderful. So. Yeah, huge case there.
Anthony, on the treaties. Next slide.
Next slide. All right.
Well, this one comes from Canada, a country where I know a little bit about.
A little bit about it.
Okay. So here, one of the problems, okay, as we know, has been the idea that foreign tax credits are not available to offset the net investment income tax, right?
Yes.
Now, there's been progress on this. We had the Christensen case earlier in the year. Okay, or maybe it was 2023, which used the U.S.-France tax treaty to successfully allow the Christensens a foreign tax credit. But this one goes further. The standard treaty clause that says, the U.S. will give a tax credit in accordance with the law of the United States, right? Well, this one says, you know what, buddy? Actually, what that clause means is the U.S. has to give a tax credit. And the language in accordance with the law of the United States has to do with the quantum of the credit and not the availability of the credit. Got it? The language means that it's the quantum, how much of a credit versus the availability of the credit. Christensen said no credit available because of that clause. This case says not so. The only reasonable way to read the tax treaty is that standard tax treaty clause forces the IRS to give the credit. The only meaning that language has is the quantum of the credit. So this is huge, huge, huge. It's far more significant than the Christensen case. This just came out a week or so ago, by the way. And I'll be right
again. I didn't even review this case, but John, wow. And
it's
here we have, and I would say this, here we have I mean, I got to take a look at this one because we have a treaty interpretation case, and I'm imagining we're looking at the intent of the parties here.
well, it includes that. It's really a very well written and organized decision that includes a discussion of treaty interpretation. But what it does highlight is the expectation of the treaty partner country. Okay, now we've talked about that in relation to Australian superannuation, etc.
Yes.
So this strengthens the argument that the Australian superannuation is Social Security, but that's another podcast.
Right, that's another, but that's huge, and thank you. That's exactly where my mind went, John. Exactly, to the Australian treaty. So I think we're going to have to do this, and again, I can't stay on top. I'm unable to stay on top of all the changes. So thanks, John, for bringing this one to my attention. And this just came out when? This was just
a week or 2 weeks ago.
All right. Well, all right. I feel a little better, but
okay.
Yeah.
Next.
All right.
Well, we talked about now what we're seeing now. Do you recognize that guy?
Roger Ver in front of and behind that really handsome guy. Oh, wait, yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think what's interesting about Roger Ver, as well as the other arguments. By the way, there's a fantastic interview of Roger Ver done by Tucker Carlson a week or two ago. I mean, you really got to watch it. Pick it up at the 30-minute mark where he starts talking about the interaction of all these things. I think this is significant for many reasons, but also what we're seeing is now throwing the extradition treaties into this, okay, because they are trying to extradite to the United States. Anyway, that's a separate podcast.
And that's another separate podcast we can't.
But Roger Ver in 2025 will be what the Moors were in 2023. It's just the issues are going to be easier to understand, okay? And my prediction is that the Treasury Department is going to regret having gone after Roger Ver. I think they're going to lose this.
Oh, when you say things like that, John, you say things like that. That just really warms my heart. I think that, and I just think quickly, I think the problem with Roger Ver's, the extradition treaty is that, it has to be, I think it has to be a felony in both countries. And,
It's going to be a dual intent. It is a what's called a dual intent treaty, okay, which most modern treaties are. But you see, the reason that his lawyers are arguing that the exit tax is unconstitutional is because if it's unconstitutional, then it's not a crime in the United States, right?
Oh, yeah, right. That too. Right. Yeah. That takes care of that.
The extra. Believe me, they don't care about the exit tax, okay? This is a way to defend his extradition, but it's interesting.
I think we got a lot of slides to get through, so we better move.
Extradition, more and more extradition, right? Remember, tax treaties, citizenship taxation, FATCA, extradition treaties, they work together. Next. Well, we had Bittner in 2023 was the rage, but we've talked about Isaac Schwartzbaum. Now, Isaac Schwartzbaum is going to go down in when the United States finally gets honest and real and uses its taxpayer money intelligently instead of wasting it, the first thing they're going to do, I would expect, is build what I will call a museum of forms and penalties in Washington, D.C. Okay? It'll be sort of like the Museum of Ethnicity in Vietnam. Okay? But I think that Isaac Schwartzbaum is a very important figure, and we'll have a statue because remember that, we know Bittner. See, Bittner, interestingly, Bittner won, but really it was a 7-2 loss against Bittner because in Bittner, the court ruled that the proper construction of the statute is that it should be a penalty based on per form. But they didn't talk about the constitutionality, and I would interpret the decision to mean all that Congress has to do is change the statute. Okay, sort of thing. But, in other words, they avoided any constitution. But in Schwartzbaum, the 11th Circuit, this is very different. Because what the 11th Circuit did is said, you know what? FBAR penalties are potentially excessive fines within the meaning of the 8th Amendment. So Bittner it was kind of a selfish win for himself, right? Hung everybody else to dry. Schwarzbaum, he ended up paying a lot of FBAR penalties, but by God, did he do a lot for humanity. So
Indeed.
Schwarzbaum, very important guy. Next.
Which brings us to
Well, this is the podcast that we did on that. It's just a reminder. Okay, I thought it was a pretty good podcast. But seriously, I think that all Americans should go buy a Christmas card for Mr. Schwarzbaum and send it to him. I mean, for all he has done for Americans, it's incredible. Next.
It really has, right? He brought it there. It got him to admit. I mean, it's hilarious. Well, it's like, because if the Eighth Amendment doesn't apply to FBAR penalties, then it doesn't mean anything. It simply doesn't mean anything. Then why did they put it in there? Then tell me the penalty it applies to. Then tell me
to create the illusion of government for the people. This.
That's kind of okay. Yeah, that's what we got here. All right. So let's keep going.
Well, in the world of FATCA, okay, we have some updates here. So, 2 years ago, see what was happening was there was this long extension. A lot of these foreign banks can't get Social Security numbers from these filthy accidental Americans and other people who won't supply them, right? I mean, what kind of person wouldn't want to, line up overnight to be the first person in the bank to give your Social Security number, to a bank outside, Who would think that way?
Who would think that? Right?
Well, apparently a lot of people. So what happened was the Treasury gave a 3-year extension, okay, meaning that the banks would not be held to be non-compliant under the FATCA IGA as long as they took some very specific steps. And just a couple of weeks ago, no progress. Treasury renewed this 3-year extension. And what's very interesting was, I had some people, when it was running out, I had a few people call me up and say, what do I do? And I said, renounce, get out of it. I mean, what's the point, And then a week later, the IRS extended this for another few years. And, this time I said, well, the banks aren't going to be hassling you for another 3 years. So do what you want. All right. So, this is Treasury's gift, not to Americans abroad, but to the foreign financial institutions, right? It's a gift from Treasury. Okay. So there we go. That's on the FATCA front. Next.
All right.
Now we have help for Americans abroad. Okay, coming in various forms. Well, let's start off with our friend Solomon Yu. Okay, he's still flushing out what it means, give meaning to Trump's pledge to end double taxation. But this is significant stuff. Coming from the president. Okay, so we have Solomon Yu next.
That's a big one.
And of course, Jim Gossert. Okay, also of Republicans overseas. Huge shout out to Jim as well. Yep. I mean, Jim is one of the unsung heroes of life, fighting
absolutely
for years in the background. Great podcast with Jim. Next. Now, this is the Social Security issue. This is something that, and by the way, okay, the Senate is reconvening at 9:30 this morning for people who want to watch the live proceedings. They are scheduled today to get to the vote on H.R. 82. Okay, now specifically that would repeal the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. Bottom line, okay, this would help Americans abroad who have their Social Security clawed back, because they basically worked in the public sector at some point. So this is interesting because this is help from lobbying in the United States they don't care about Americans abroad, obviously, but there would be a spin-off effect as well. So who knows, by the end of today or tomorrow, the windfall elimination provision might be history. By the way, I think there's lessons for advocacy here because it's taken almost 50 years, to get this change. 50 years. Okay, sorry, it's only 45.
Yeah. Well, I think the issue is that the constituency is a bunch of federal employees, so that helps. That
certainly helps. Okay, in making the case for the unfairness. But anyway, this is more possible legislative relief. Okay, next.
All right, and next we're moving along here. Yes.
Now, at this moment, as we come to the end in 2024, I want to do a shout out to various groups, some individuals. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. I had this idea at like 5 after 7 this morning, so I had to do this awfully quickly to get this into the presentation day. But I think, I think that there has been progress and there continues to be slow progress. But I think it's important to recognize that this progress, is really, I think, a collaborative effort from so many groups and people over the years. Like it's like the baton principle, right? More goes a little bit part of the way. Ver picks up the baton. I think it's kind of like that. So I want to first of all do a shout out here to some groups. And by the way, if I miss anybody, it's it wasn't intentional. I know I haven't got everybody or every group in here. If I had another hour, I don't think it would have made any difference because I'm, sort of limited in my bandwidth generally in life. But here we go. I'm going to begin with SEAT, okay, which is an organization that Keith and I are part of. It's, very, very good research. Special shout out to Laura Snyder, who has just written incredible stuff on this, okay, to, I think provide sort of the academic and intellectual basis for change. I want to give a shout out to American Citizens Abroad. They've been at this for many, many years, Charles Bruce and Mary Louise Serrato. Want to give a shout out to Arrow, a Paris-based organization, Fred Eibinder, Doris Spear, etc. Want to give a shout out to this newer group, Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad. Okay. I mean, all of these groups have, in their own way, have done important things and I think should be recognized as contributing to, the general movement in the right direction today. So that's the first group. Next. Here's some individuals. How could we have a podcast without mentioning Keith Redmond's American Expatriates group, right?
All right. Yeah, Keith couldn't join us today, but yeah, unfortunately. So,
but
I think Keith.
Well, we got that IRS medic guy, Anthony. Maybe we should give a shout out to him too.
I think we should. He sounds impressive. He sounds pretty impressive. I got to be honest.
Okay. All right. Then a shout out to Anthony. And I think the original founder of this, when it was just pitch dark, no light at all, would have been the Isaac Brock Society in Canada. Less active now, but by far and away the best research on all this.
I guess I should mention, I don't know if I ever mentioned this about the Isaac Brock Society, about how I became introduced to them. So it was an interesting way. So I used this program called Scrapebox to generate backlinks for my website. So it was something that would leave comments on various relevant blogs. And so I spammed Isaac Brock with just some basic F-bar crap. And my account was blasted out of space for my spamming, for spamming them with a comment. But then I was like, wait a second, you guys are serious. It's like, whoa, wait, so am I. Hang on, let's be friends. Sorry about that. So that's actually how I got introduced to them. Great group. And really, you're right. You're absolutely right. They were the only ones really back in 2014 kind of on the ball about this, I would say.
Well, still, by far and away, the best sort of, I would call non, credentialed research, right?
Yeah.
Et cetera. Anyway, moving on. Political groups, of course, you got to give a shout out to Republicans overseas, especially the tax group, but yeah. Also the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force has worked hard.
They had, yeah.
They're
limited, yeah.
So we give a shout out to them. Let's go to 4. And, I almost forgot Monty Silver.
Yeah.
I had to delay this because, Monty Silver, a true pioneer, tremendous work on the transition tax and GILTI. And if you're going to mention Monty Silver, that he's an Israel-based U.S. lawyer. Got to mention Mark Zell, who, I think has been his lawyer through most of this. So, and I want to emphasize that there are a lot of others too. Okay, these are just some people. And the reason I'm doing this, well, partly because I think they deserve shout outs, but more because I want to make the point that there's no comparison between where we are today and say 10 years ago.
Exactly.
It's the result of a lot of, it's a collective, these groups are independent of each other, but it's a collective effort towards generally a common cause, and they've all contributed in some way or another. And if one is in the situation of trying to recognize and attribute awards, so to speak, for progress, I mean, all of these people in their own way and groups are important. Next, we have Loper Bright. Well, that's kind of a cool decision.
That was a good. I like that
And
one.
nothing to do with taxation per se, right?
No, no,
That
no.
really, really claws back regulatory authority. And we know how much of the tax code is based on regulation.
Hmm.
So, I think the potential for Loper Bright, and we've done stuff on this before, to restrict U.S. Treasury, in other words, to kind of cabin them in to what the statute says is enormous. But anyway, next.
Yeah, and that brings us, that there. I think there might be a place where I'll insert this here. Maybe here. Maybe this is where I'll talk about. Let me go back to this slide on Loper Bright, because I did notice the outgoing commissioner of Internal Revenue said, "Well, Loper Bright doesn't apply all that much." So this appointed, so he's going to interpret what the Supreme Court actually meant by it. That's interesting. But really, when we look at Loper Bright. There's a few things that there's the one thing that comes to mind is our friend the FBAR, because if we look at the statute, John and I have gone over this many times. Just a quick refresher. If you look at the statute, it doesn't prescribe an FBAR as the regulations say. It prescribes something completely different. So the actual, and this is sort of where I hope someone picks up the baton on this and argues, you know what, the entire FBAR is illegal because there's no statutory authority for it. And that's the problem with the FBAR. It is so divorced from the law, it's completely made up. It really is. It does. The word foreign does appear in both places, but that's other than that, nothing else. All right. So where are there? All right. So here we got the Department of Government Efficiency. Oh, I don't know if making another department makes the government more efficient. I think I don't know.
Well, this is the first time, although I don't think it's likely, but only with the election of somebody like President Trump would it be possible to get an overhaul of U.S. taxation, which is needed. And it could begin, with this Department of Government Efficiency thing. I mean, I think it's interesting that this signals we're not going to have business as usual. Okay, we're actually going to think about the process of government a little bit. And as we know, the Internal Revenue Code is the organizing principle of society, as well as the U.S. Constitution. And if one is serious about trying to identify inefficiencies, there's no way you're going to be doing that without identifying large parts of the tax system. But anyway,
right. Well, I would say the true, the Federal Reserve and IRS are the two things that rule over us at the top. So there's no way to address inefficiency if you don't, take a look at, or the bottom. Let's say the bottom. They're really not at the top. They're at the bottom. All right, here we go. Oh, yes.
In this context, we got to mention Steve Hayes and Jim Bennett of Fair Tax fame. Great people, great ideas. Great commitment, and it may be that their time has come. It's sort of like I'm reminded of two quotes. One from George Bush Sr. 90% of life is just showing up. I don't know where that came from, but they've certainly shown up for a lot of years. They're still there. And I remember Reagan's quote, "I never left the Democratic Party; they left me." Okay, in other words, if you stay true to your convictions, sooner or later, okay, your thinking will be in style. And it may very well be that it's time for the fair tax to be taken seriously as part of the context.
And this was my takeaway with Jim, because I came into the fair tax a little suspicious, and I still am, but I'll tell you why. Because, and if you watch podcasts, this is my conclusion, is that I really don't want the fair tax. The reason why is because it raises too much revenue. That's why. I don't think the government should have that much revenue. However, then this is what I would say. Under the constraints of trying to find a tax system to replace the IRS that would raise enough revenue, I have not come across a better proposal than the fair tax. So really, my argument is actually foundational, that I don't want this federal government to have the power it does. And the way it has its powers, it controls every little part of our financial lives, at least, and then other parts of our lives too. So that's what I would say. If we're going to keep the status quo of having an all-powerful federal government, for whatever reasons we think that's a good idea, then the fair tax, to me, is the best way. And I actually challenged them on because they said, "Oh, we're going to get rid of the IRS," and I'm like, "Oh, come on, how are you guys going to do that?" It actually does make sense. It actually does. So I invite everyone to watch that podcast. The fair tax is much better than what I thought it would be. Again, I just don't want this level of taxation by the federal government. That's all. So what do we got here? All right, what do we got here?
This next one is sort of random. Here we have the academics, off in their own world.
Are they preparing for the form updates in form crime?
No, they're not interested in that. They're interested in more important issues like Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 and all that.
Okay. So they want the whole.
I mean, I think it shows you. By the way, this is not meant to disparage anybody. Okay, this is just a representative example. Okay, of what's going on in the tax community, what they're thinking about.
You don't think that we should have tax professors decide what the tax code is? You think? I wonder if we should have people do it, or tax professors. Right?
My God, you'd be better having a garbage man do that. I mean, you have to have these decisions made by people who understand that their lives are ruled by the tax code, not by pension intellectuals. But anyway, next. All right, now, so we've been over this, and as I finished this presentation, I thought that really we should have an award. We're going to call the Introducing the Helping Americans Abroad Award for who should receive it. And I'm hoping that, we can get some suggestions here, which litigants, which individuals, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think? Is that a good idea, Anthony?
I think that's a great idea. I really do want to open this up to nominations for people who've helped out, who helped out the most. I think we should have, the nomination process, and just being nominated it would be an honor for anybody. But boy, I would have to think about this myself. I'm actually, no offense, I have my pick. I just realized it. I think he's on this podcast. I think he is. John Richardson. That's actually my pick, because I think that John has been the intellectual support for so many of us. And he's been for me, and I know Solomon, we all look to John for his things, and he has been consistent. When you talk about Isaac Brock back in 2014, well, there was someone else, John Richardson, back then. So that's where I'm going to go, and I would really like to see what other people say, what they other think, and where should they vote though, John?
Well, we can put them in the comments, or but here's the thing: I was going to give a free consultation to whoever. I can't give the free consultation to myself, so I guess I'm out of the.
Oh, okay, all right. So other than John, exempting John. And I would say, and I would want to exempt myself from this too, because, and here's why: because I am interested in helping Americans abroad, but I'm also interested in ending everything about this federal government.
Well, that's true.
Generally too. So I could take myself out of this, and I would love to give a consultation too. So I'll take myself out of the running as well. But yeah, we're really curious. Who do you guys?
I mean, these are pivotal. Roger Ver, maybe he should get the award.
Well, I also wonder about Keith Redmond.
Maybe, even somebody who I've actually, here's somebody I'll nominate. In all seriousness, is the woman who's kept the Isaac Brock Society running through thick and thin all these years, Mary Walls. Just the what do you call her? The admin? Is that what you call these people who run these groups? I mean, it doesn't have to be, somebody who can afford, big legal fees, right? I mean, there's a lot. My point is, there's a lot of people, and I guess this is my attempt to get people to realize and think about, who the people are, who've been there through thick and thin. But maybe put some in the comments, et cetera, on this, because there really are a lot, and and I guess. To some extent, here's kind of what I think, right? It's easy. I've been at this for many, many years. And so I have a longer term perspective, and I can see the difference between where we are now versus a decade ago, right? And that's not easy to see, if you haven't been at this for that length of time, right?
And that, John, I think that's a great thing. So people coming in, it's like, oh, there's never going to be any fix. There's never going to be any hope. It's like, well, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it undermines the fact that we've been at this, and there have been people at this longer than I've been, a lot longer. it ignores the incredible changes. You know, we've been part of it, and so we know. Okay, a lot of people are picking up, or a lot of people getting interested in it, and honestly, this channel is watched by a lot of tax professionals too.
Sure.
And I've seen a lot of things kind of come back of like, oh yeah, I know where that idea came from. I think that's what's helping out. And so, you know, and the more that we build this community, and I think that's really what we're trying to do here is build this community of like-minded people. That's what it's about. We cannot do this by ourselves. No one person can come in with a flamethrower. That'd be nice. But you need someone to build that flamethrower and fill it up.
Oh, Anthony, that's absolutely right. But, you know, as we get closer to some kind of resolution, I think it's important for, you know, people to realize that this has been the result of so many, you know, different people and, you know, and not, you know, do any division that, you know, it's this group or that group, you know, this sort of stuff. I mean, it really has been, you know, a lot of people and groups pulling in the right direction. It reminds me, was this Benjamin Franklin? If we don't hang together, we'll hang separately. Is that where that comes from? I think it may be, you know, but anyway, think of it that way. If we don't hang together, we'll hang separately. And not only do Americans abroad need to hang together, but they must recognize, okay, that they are hanging together, okay, on this, which is, I think, so important. But anyway, next. Oh,
yeah. We're at the end. We're at the end of your presentation, and I was wondering if you were going to cover this. So I have a screen share I want to share with you because I think this is the other thing, and this is not there are way too many updates to get everything here. So let me just go back to what a big story. That happened earlier this year. I love it. I love this because it was such a big story. It was actually, you know, it was actually on Waka Channel 8 Action News.
Absolutely.
And now this was the first case that came out. Okay, so I want to talk about this first case that came out. This was in Alabama. The Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting Form, which is part of the Corporate Transparency Act, requires every U.S. person, well, not everyone, because certain people are exempted, but if you own an LLC, whether regardless if it makes money or not, that's something that you're required to file a beneficial ownership information report and send it to our friends at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the same people who enforce the FBAR. And so when you have to submit a criminal form, then, hey, look, owning an LLC is presumptively a criminal act that can only be cured by filing a beneficial ownership information report. And if you don't, there's a $10,000 penalty. Well, a federal judge in Alabama ruled that this was totally unconstitutional. March 5th, 2024. But this is what happened. And this is sort of how you have to understand just how much the U.S. Treasury, how much our government is dead set against us, how dead set they are against following the rules, is that what the Treasury did after they lost, after they were slammed down by Lyles Burke for not having any authority to pass this law. What Treasury did is like, well, that decision only applies to those plaintiffs in those particular cases. That you had to be a member of the Small Business Association. And if you don't work, it doesn't apply to you. You still have to file that. Judge never said anything like that. That was Treasury inventing its own interpretation. There was nothing in there. Look, you don't have the authority to do this. How could you just say, well, that only applies to those plaintiffs? You have no authority. So, fortunately, there was another case from Texas. Texas Top Cop Shop. And this just came out December or earlier this year. December 3rd is, I think, the decision. The date of this is December 5th. There, guess what, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network? Your bore is gone. There's a national injunction. It's totally gone. We had to tell them twice. We had to tell Treasury, the government, twice not to do what they wanted to do. So there it is. And I think, and now that what's exciting for me, what's exciting about this decision is if we look at it, there's some applicability to the FBAR. I see some similar things if we go through the analysis on the FBAR, because really it's an unreasonable search and seizure. Because again, owning an LLC is now deemed by the federal government to be presumptively a criminal act that can only be cured by sharing otherwise private information and information that's designed to be private by state law with the federal authorities. That is what they're getting around. So, and it's a what it is, it's a very backwards way to violate the Fourth Amendment. That's really what it is. Oh, it's like, oh, okay. No, we're not going to commit unreasonable searches and seizures. We'll just penalize people if they don't give everything to us. And that's really, where our federal government is. And so that is the same sort of thing of the FBAR. There's no requirement. What do you mean you have to report a foreign bank account? No, foreign bank accounts are designed to be private because we don't want people knowing about them. But, again, with FinCEN, with their interpretation, well, that doesn't matter. Like, yeah, we would never be able to snoop on you, but we'll create this filing obligation that basically allows us to snoop on you under penalty of law and ruinous penalties ruinous penalties. So those are the, I think, the exciting things that I see. And I think that we're, getting rid of this and getting the government under control. So that's what, as you see, if we have any comments here. I think we got a few different comments, so let's get to that there. So this has been, right. I mean, it's really been a heck of a year, John, right? So
absolutely it has. Yeah.
All right, well, Borshell has a comment here. How about the Department of Common Sense first? Well, Borshell, I would say this is that I've been, I don't believe that, I think we've been sold a bill of goods. I think the number one proponent of telling us that the federal government is a good idea is the federal government. That if we take away that, I think people would see what it is. And so I don't think we can get the common sense until we get to the foundational issues of what this government really is. And that from its outset, it's really been a criminal conspiracy designed to make very few people wealthy and very few people poor. The entire mythology behind the American Revolution needs to be truly, truly uncovered. And even Washington himself, the great George Washington, he gave us that advice. Hey, let's avoid those foreign entanglements. The guy who created all these foreign entanglements, no, it was already gone. The United States, in order to fund the Revolutionary War, the U.S. government was in debt to foreign bankers that had been in control of the United States since its onset. So, hey, we got a nice clap from Geza. Thank you very much. And then, right, and I would say, oh, here we got some nominations from Borshell. Keith for the Face of the Year on Live Call. Oh, that's funny. Keith, you are a handsome man. We could use your face. Hopefully we'll. Anthony for best headset and John for no. Oh, fantastic. And then I think this is where we could, so Geza has this, and this is a really good place maybe for us to conclude, John. So how would you answer this question from the great Hungarian Geza Kovacs?
I think it's too early to tell.
Okay.
We've got a new administration coming in January 21st. There's the necessity of doing something, in the next, 90 days or whatever, because of the parts of the TCJA that are expiring. So there will be activity. The question is what, and, the trick is going to be, how to get stuff in, et cetera. Now, bear in mind that the current Congress, I think, ends December 31st, right? So whatever's going on now is going to have to be reset, right? With a new Congress as well. And this is another example, by the way, of how and why, work done by somebody or a group, will perhaps sit on the shelf and be pulled out again. I mean, in 2018, in December, I think it was December, Congressman Holding introduced the Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad Act or something, which was an expansion of the foreign earned income exclusion. I mean, it was too late for anything to happen with it, but it continued its existence as a basis for discussion, et cetera. So it doesn't seem to me that anything definitively can happen during the term of this Congress. But again, as we see, things that are going on will play a role, in the next Congress. So so things will definitely happen. The trick is going to be to keep suggestions for reform improvement simple enough so that they can fit into a much broader bill, right? Where does that go? We'll see.
Yeah, and I would say, this is how I would answer this question: is how is tax reform looking? Well, it kind of depends on us. Are we going to retreat to our typical camps and just say, okay, it's a Democrat Republican issue? Or are we going to unite as a people to say Republicans and Democrats use a tax code to enslave all of us and with things that we couldn't possibly want? That we need to take a look at actually what all of this is. Who would vote for this stuff? Where does this come from? And I know we have our pension as intellectuals in law schools. A lot of it comes from there. But it doesn't come from the people. Who would ever vote for something like this? Remember, and again, this is really an overall point. If you read the instructions, to form 1040, just a basic 1040, okay, they're written to the 9th to 11th grade reading comprehension. This is just the basic 1040, 9th to 11th grade. Unfortunately, the average reading comprehension of every adult in the United States of America is the 5th grade level. So why would a majority of the people vote for something they couldn't possibly understand and will be penalized of? And not only that, they can't possibly understand it, and you can't actually delegate your ability to your responsibility to file truthful and accurate returns to anybody. You are ultimately responsible. So I think the number one thing is we need to take a real foundational look at this and stop going to our camps to say, hey, your political opposition is the enemy. No. That's the fight they want us to have. That's the fight they want us to have.
I think, Anthony, you're absolutely right. These kinds of injustices go on because of what I would call a divide and conquer ploy, right? You get a carve out for a certain number of people, take them out of the opposition. I have been very, very interested and impressed by the lobbying that various groups have done to get rid of this windfall elimination provision. I think that it is clearly a testament to the potential for the effectiveness of focused lobbying, etc. And I think that it's a very, very good lesson for Americans abroad. Largely, unfortunately, this is what I really think. I think the reason that the process for reform is slowed is because individuals on the ground are sort of delegating this to a small group of people or groups, right? I think they really need to start making noise in a unifying manner. But anyway, next, see what else we got.
All right. So Gaza has another question. It's like, what proposals are on the table? I think this is a hard one to answer because I've heard everything.
Not at the moment because we don't have a new administration in Congress yet.
Well, look, I would also say this. I was listening to Donald Trump on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he said words like this. And I'm not quoting it exactly right. He said, "Yeah, the income tax was a mistake, and it was very foolish." And he said this: foreign countries wanted the income tax. I mean, it's true, but for him to say that was amazing. And if you actually think about what he said, then he's saying the U.S. income tax is a foreign insurrection upon the American people. Or maybe I'm reaching too much, but I have a basis for it at least. So I don't know what that was. Maybe that was just some red meat for people like me to give me hope, right? Maybe that's all it was. But he did say that, and it is true. So what tax reforms are on the table? I think it just depends on what kind of, we need a basic reform of our whole federal government, really. And that's what if you're going to reform tax, because it's the true Constitution of America. So if we're going to do real serious tax reform, not just rearrange the deck chairs and, hey, we're going to favor these people and then punish Americans overseas, of course, because that's the way it always goes, then there's going to have to be a change to the government. And I don't know if the people are ready for that, but maybe they are. Maybe I know some people are. And this gets me to Borchell. Yeah, exactly. I'm ready for Ron Paul. I am ready for Ron Paul. I wasn't ready for him in 2000, but I'm ready for him now. And I think a lot of people are as well. I'm not sure exactly the 0% tax, but I like the sound of it, that Ron Paul was advocating back for it. And Ron Paul, I think, is somebody who has been proven to be right. I think a lot of people dismissed him. But over the years, he has been proven to be right. And his son ran, by the way, we got to give a shout out to him because he actually showed up at our repeal FACA hearing and laid down testimony, great testimony. And it's incredibly rare for a senator to give testimony to the House Ways and Means. So that was an amazing thing. So that's what we have on that. So, we're just about up on time. So what are your concluding thoughts, John Richardson?
Well, I'm very optimistic. Of course, I've always been optimistic, so maybe I'm the wrong person to talk to. About progress. I mean, my feeling on this is, was it Martin Luther King? The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, something like that. I think the only thing that we're really betting on here is time. I don't think that it's going to be easy, but I think that as long as people take the position that nothing can be done, etc., then nothing will be done. People, governments, they rise and fall to your level of expectations. The conditions for change have never been better. Okay. Large, it's just, kind of where we are, right? There has to be tax reform. We have the American people have elected a president, a Congress, and a Senate, okay, that I think is much more likely to embrace the idea of reform. So who knows? There will be change. Okay. All you're betting on is time.
Thank you, John. I think you're absolutely right. This is what I would conclude with. And thank you, John. 'Cause you know what? I am optimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic. And normally this is what I tell people, but I want to say something different today. Normally I tell people like, hey, look, if you're watching this podcast, you're going to be a pretty smart person. You're probably influential amongst a bunch of people. And it's always a good idea to grab snippets and share with your peers this. But the other thing, and this is what I was just thinking of, is that because I have some nephews and my boys, oh boy, are they red-pilled. Are they red-pilled? They actually understand U.S. politics. This younger generation, as I talk to them, they actually understand U.S. politics far better than baby boomers. They understand it. And so one of the things I would suggest to everyone is educate your children. Don't let them fill their head up with the nonsense that allows this right and left wing phony divide. It's really phony when you think about because no one really agrees with either camp 100%, but yet we're putting either one. Doesn't make any sense. So with this phony divide that we're putting in, that it's Democrats versus Republicans, but every time Washington, D.C. wins, that's the thing we need to end. And where it ends is with our next generations. But they only can get there if we explain this to them. And that is how we can get rid of this. I don't know if it's something that, a true reform is something that I'll see in my lifetime, but I hope my boys will. And I want to give them the tools to properly recognize where the true threats come from, what this government truly, truly is. And I think that's the best thing we all could do is educate our kids, because that is where, demographics are destiny. And if we just have young generations who know the truth, that's fantastic for them. So that's where I want to conclude. And by the way, and I would say this, John and I, we've been talking about this, renunciation, John. And if it doesn't happen in 2025, might really want to renounce your U.S. citizenship.
On the renunciation issue, I don't think that it necessarily should be tied to tax reform. I think that there are a lot of people who, regardless of where this comes down, would probably be a lot happier without any U.S. citizenship stuff, right? Because remember that change here is never going to solve all the problems unless there's a complete severance of citizenship from tax residency. And I think it's going to be, although that's the gold standard, one of the problems that we've got right now with the amendments to the TCJA is that the changes have got to be small, focused, and simple, right? And that necessarily means I don't see at the moment, meaning in the next 3 to 6 months, a complete severance of citizenship from tax residency. So, I think that so much of citizenship is habitual thinking. I mean, maybe I'll close with this. I got a note last week from a woman in her 80s who I've sort of, corresponded with for at least 10 years, on this issue. And, she was all optimistic about the change. I said to her, does this really matter to you? I mean, you haven't lived in the United States for 50 years. How does this really affect your life in any significant way? Rather than think about, should I keep my U.S. citizenship if there's, a change in these tax laws? Maybe the better question to ask is, what value is it to you regardless? I said, gently, I said, you've been thinking about this for so long. I mean, perhaps you should consider just renouncing so you don't think about it anymore. I mean,
Exactly. And that's what I would say. People hang on to this thing and it's just a habit. So if you are thinking about renouncing your citizenship and you're getting serious about it, why don't you reach out to John? He's helping people in tricky renunciation. I think we could tell he knows the law pretty well. So reach out to John. Here's his email if you're thinking about citizenship solutions at protonmail.com. Reach out to John if you're thinking about renouncing your citizenship. If you're not, and you got a little bit of a tax issue, you could book a time to speak with us here at irismedic.com. Just go to offshore, book a time to speak with us. We'd love to help you, whether you're thinking that you need a streamlined disclosure or something else. We want to make sure you get the right thing and not push you in something that's going to harm you, but actually benefit you every which way. So with that, let me just I know Keith wasn't here, but I do want to give a link to his Facebook group. Look up that. If you haven't joined this, Keith wasn't here today, but a great group. Great insight to what other people are doing and where we find reality. There's a lot of press releases the government has about telling us how great the government is. Well, right. Truth's a little different. So now with that, I think we are ready to conclude. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Be sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications so you know when we go live and you can participate. This is Anthony Parent for John Richardson. Thanks for watching.